Did you know that there exists in women an instinct so powerful that it can drive them to abandon their children, their family, and their entire built life in just a few days? Carl Jung discovered something that shook the foundations of psychology. Within the female mind operates a primal force that exerts an influence greater than love, stronger than logic, and more dominant than any other human emotion. This unique instinct explains why a woman can be completely in love with you today and tomorrow leave with another man without looking back. Why do intelligent and accomplished women make choices that seem utterly self-destructive? Why does she ignore a man who offers everything to give herself to one who offers nothing? Jung called this discovery the best-kept secret of feminine nature. It is a mechanism as old as the human species itself, programmed into female DNA to ensure something very specific. When you uncover what this instinct is, you will never see women's behavior the same way again. Prepare yourself for a revelation that will shock you. The unique instinct revealed by Jung. In the archives of psychological research lies a discovery so profound that it changed everything we thought we knew about female behavior. Carl Jung spent decades studying the human mind, but nothing prepared him for what he would uncover about women's deepest motivations. What he discovered was not a mere theory or academic concept. It was a biological reality that has shaped human relationships for thousands of years. This instinct operates beneath the surface of conscious thought, guiding decisions that often seem completely irrational to outside observers. It is not influenced by education, social status, or intelligence. A woman with a doctorate in science can be just as controlled by this force as someone who never finished high school. Wealth does not protect against it. Age, experience, or wisdom gained from previous relationships do not matter either. The instinct Jung identified is a survival mechanism based on selection. At its core, it is an unconscious drive to seek out genetic material that will produce the most robust offspring. But this is where it gets fascinating. This programming does not care about modern concepts of compatibility, shared values, or even happiness. It operates according to ancient algorithms that were useful when humans lived in caves, where survival depended on physical strength and dominance. What makes this discovery so shocking is how it manifests in today's world. A woman may consciously desire stability, kindness, and emotional support. She may genuinely believe these qualities are the most important to her. But when this primal instinct activates, all those conscious desires become secondary. Suddenly, she begins to feel an attraction to men who exhibit traits her rational mind knows are problematic. The biological markers this instinct responds to are surprisingly specific. Self-confidence bordering on arrogance triggers this instinct more than humility or kindness. Unpredictability activates it more than reliability. Risk-taking stimulates it more than careful planning. These are not conscious preferences. They are hardwired responses that completely bypass rational thought. Jung realized that women experiencing this activation often describe feeling like they are not themselves. They make decisions that seem entirely contrary to their character. They ignore the advice of friends and family. They abandon plans and commitments they previously valued. This is not a weakness or a lapse in judgment. It is biology overriding conscious choice. The timing of when this instinct becomes active is also critical. It does not operate consistently throughout a woman's life. There are specific periods when it becomes more dominant, often coinciding with biological cycles and life transitions. Understanding these patterns was key to Jung's progress in understanding female psychology. Perhaps most importantly, Jung discovered that this instinct operates independently of love. A woman can genuinely love a man while being biologically drawn to another. She can have deep emotional bonds, shared memories, and sincerely care for someone, while simultaneously feeling an overwhelming attraction to a completely different type of person. This creates an internal conflict that leads to so many seemingly inexplicable relationship decisions. The power of this programming is so strong that it can override years of relationship building in a matter of days or even hours. Jung documented cases where women left stable, loving relationships after brief encounters with men who triggered this biological response. The rational mind then tries to create explanations, but the decision was made at a level far deeper than conscious reasoning. What is particularly striking is how this instinct influences perception itself. Once activated, a woman begins to perceive the same behaviors differently depending on who exhibits them. Aggression from the wrong person feels threatening, but identical behavior from someone who triggers this instinct feels exciting and protective. Emotional unavailability from a stable partner feels cold, but the same trait in a biologically attractive man feels mysterious and alluring. Jung's research showed that fighting this instinct is almost impossible because it operates through the brain's reward systems. When a woman encounters someone who activates this programming, her brain releases a cocktail of chemicals that induce intense feelings of attraction, excitement, and even euphoria. These are not emotions she chooses to feel. They are biological responses as automatic as hunger or thirst. This discovery explains why traditional relationship advice often fails women. Suggestions to choose a good man or think logically about her future miss the mark entirely. When this instinct is active, logic becomes secondary. The biological programming is designed to override rational thought because, from an evolutionary perspective, genetic selection was more important than individual happiness. Understanding this mechanism does not diminish the importance of women or reduce them to their biology. On the contrary, it reveals the incredible power of the forces that have shaped human behavior for millennia. Jung's breakthrough was not about judging these reactions, but about recognizing them as fundamental aspects of human nature, operating whether they are accepted or not. By the way, if you're curious about how to dive deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the iBook, The Q Method. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. You'll find the link in the first pinned comment below. 2. How does this instinct override love? The relationship between this primal instinct and love is perhaps the most perplexing aspect of human relationships. Most people assume that love is the most powerful force in romantic relationships, but Jung's research revealed something far more complex. Love operates in the conscious mind, building bonds through shared experiences, emotional intimacy, and rational compatibility. This biological instinct, however, operates at a much deeper level, often in direct opposition to conscious feelings. When this instinct activates, it does not erase love. It simply becomes more powerful than love. A woman can remain deeply in love with her partner while feeling an overwhelming biological attraction to someone else. This creates a war within her between what she consciously wants and what her biology demands. The result is often confusion, guilt, and decisions that seem to contradict everything she believed about herself. The mechanism behind this override is rooted in brain chemistry. Love releases oxytocin and dopamine, creating feelings of connection and pleasure. But when the survival instinct activates, it triggers a different chemical cascade involving adrenaline, norepinephrine, and a specific cocktail of hormones designed to focus attention and create intense motivation. This biological response is so powerful that it can literally alter how a woman's brain processes relationship information. What makes this particularly destructive to relationships is how quickly it can happen. Love builds slowly over time through consistent positive interactions. This instinct can activate in minutes or hours after encountering someone who exhibits the right biological markers. The speed and intensity of this response often catch women off guard, leading them to question everything they thought they knew about their own desires. The instinct also changes how women interpret their current relationships. Behaviors from a loving partner that were once seen as protective can suddenly feel boring or stifling. Stability that once provided comfort can feel like stagnation. The biological programming creates a filter that reframes existing relationships in a negative light, while highlighting the excitement of new possibilities. Jung observed that women in this state often describe a feeling of falling out of love. But in reality, their biological priorities have shifted. The qualities that create lasting love, kindness, reliability, emotional availability, become less important than those signaling genetic fitness. This shift in priorities makes the current relationship feel inadequate, even when, in reality, nothing has changed in the partner's behavior. The timing of this override is also significant. It often occurs during biological transitions, specific points in menstrual cycles, life changes, or periods of stress. During these windows, the instinct becomes more active and can overshadow even the strongest feelings of love. Women experiencing this often report a sensation as if a switch has been flipped, changing their entire perspective on their relationship overnight. Perhaps most tragically, this biological override can lead women to sabotage relationships with partners who truly love them. The instinct doesn't just create attraction to other men. It actively generates dissatisfaction with current partners who don't trigger the same biological response. This leads to picking fights, finding fault in previously acceptable behaviors, and creating distance in the relationship. The guilt associated with these feelings often makes matters worse. Women know they love their partners and cannot understand why they suddenly feel differently. They may blame themselves for being shallow or ungrateful, not realizing they are experiencing a biological response beyond their conscious control. This internal conflict between love and instinct creates emotional confusion that affects every aspect of their relationships. What's particularly challenging is that this instinct operates independently of relationship satisfaction. A woman can be completely content with her partner, grateful for their relationship, and have no conscious complaints. Yet when this biological programming activates, none of that conscious satisfaction matters. The instinct evaluates potential partners based on entirely different criteria than those that create happiness in a relationship. Jung found that trying to fight this override through sheer willpower rarely works. The biological forces involved are too powerful and operate below the level of conscious choice. The key becomes understanding. When a woman recognizes what's happening as a biological response rather than a reflection of her true feelings, she can make more conscious decisions to navigate these situations. The instinct also influences memory and perception in a way that reinforces its power. Once activated, it can cause women to recall past relationship issues more vividly while minimizing positive memories. It emphasizes the excitement and potential of new connections while downplaying their risks. This selective processing of information makes the biological choice seem more rational than it actually is. Understanding how this instinct overrides love does not diminish the reality of either force. Both are legitimate aspects of human experience. Love creates the foundation for lasting relationships, emotional intimacy, and building a life together. The biological instinct serves evolutionary goals related to genetic diversity and survival. The tragedy occurs when people don't understand that these two forces can coexist, leading to decisions that destroy love-based relationships for biological satisfaction that may prove temporary and unfulfilling. By the way, if you want to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the SIM method. It's a concise guide that will help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. 3. Why does she abandon everything for him? The moment this ancient instinct locks onto a target, rational decision-making becomes almost impossible. Women who have spent years building careers, relationships, and a stable life may be ready to abandon it all for someone they barely know. This isn't because they are weak or lack self-control. It's a biological programming so powerful that it can override decades of careful life planning in a matter of days. When Jung studied this phenomenon, he found that this abandonment is neither gradual nor thoughtful. It happens with shocking speed and intensity. A woman may spend months or years making careful decisions about her future, weighing pros and cons, considering consequences. But when this instinct activates, all that careful planning becomes irrelevant. The biological drive creates such an intense focus on a single person that everything else in her life begins to feel insignificant by comparison. The mechanism behind this abandonment is tied to how the brain processes priorities during intense biological attraction. Normally, decision-making involves considering multiple factors: financial security, family relationships, career goals, personal values. But when this primal programming takes over, it creates a tunnel vision. The brain starts filtering out information that doesn't support pursuing the new attraction, while amplifying anything that justifies dramatic life changes. What makes this particularly devastating is how it affects her perception of what she's giving up. Things that once seemed important, her job, her home, her support network, suddenly appear as obstacles preventing her from pursuing this overwhelming attraction. The biological programming doesn't just create attraction to someone new. It actively diminishes the value of everything that might compete with that attraction. The speed of these decisions often shocks everyone around her, including herself. Jung documented cases where women abandoned marriages, quit jobs, and moved across the country within weeks of meeting someone who triggered this response. From the outside, these decisions seem utterly irrational, but from within the experience, they feel not only reasonable, but absolutely necessary. This instinct also creates a unique form of tunnel vision that affects how she perceives risk. Normally, major life changes require careful consideration of potential consequences. But when this biological program is activated, the brain actually suppresses awareness of negative possibilities, while amplifying focus on potential rewards. She may overlook glaring red flags about the new person while exaggerating the problems in her current situation. The emotional state created by this instinct mimics what people describe as feeling truly alive for the first time. In comparison, everything in her previous life suddenly feels gray and lifeless. This doesn't mean her life was problematic. It's simply that the biological response creates such intense stimulation that normal experiences pale in comparison. This contrast makes abandoning everything feel more like waking up from a long sleep than destroying a good life. Family and friends who witness this often feel helpless and baffled. They see a loved one making blatantly destructive choices and cannot understand why logical arguments have no effect. They don't realize that logic has been temporarily overridden by programming designed to bypass rational thought. Trying to reason with someone in this state is like trying to convince someone they're not hungry. The biological drive is stronger than conscious reasoning. The timing of this abandonment often coincides with periods when women are biologically primed for major life changes. Certain hormonal cycles, life transitions, or periods of stress can make this instinct more active and influential. During these windows, the attraction to radical change becomes almost irresistible, especially when combined with an encounter with someone who triggers a biological response. What's particularly tragic is how this affects relationships with people who truly care about her. Parents, siblings, close friends, and loving partners suddenly start being perceived as obstacles to overcome, rather than valuable bonds to preserve. The biological programming creates such an intense focus on the new attraction that other relationships lose their emotional significance almost overnight. The instinct also influences how she interprets opposition from others. When family and friends express concern about her dramatic changes, the biological programming filters that concern as jealousy or attempts at control rather than genuine care. This creates a us-against-them mentality that further isolates her from her support network and makes the abandonment feel even more justified. Jung observed that women experiencing this phenomenon often describe a sense of finally being true to themselves, even though their actions contradict everything they previously valued. The biological response creates such an intense internal conviction that abandoning everything feels like following authentic desires rather than destroying a carefully built life. This internal certainty makes external input feel irrelevant or misguided. The consequences of these decisions often lead to overwhelming regret once the biological intensity fades. Women who have given up careers, relationships, and security find themselves in situations they would never have chosen with a clear mind. But by then, the damage to their previous life is often irreversible. Lost jobs, broken relationships, support networks damaged by sudden abandonment. Understanding this pattern doesn't excuse the destruction it can cause, but it explains why it happens with such regularity. The biological programming doesn't care about human social structures, career goals, or relationship commitments. It is designed to override those considerations when a genetic selection opportunity arises. Recognizing this as a biological phenomenon, not a character flaw, is the first step to understanding why intelligent, capable women sometimes make choices that seem utterly self-destructive. Fourth, an invisible force. She cannot control the most disturbing aspect of this biological instinct is how it operates completely outside of conscious awareness. Women experiencing its influence sincerely believe they are making rational choices based on their own desires and preferences. They don't realize they are being guided by programming that completely bypasses their conscious mind. This invisibility makes the instinct particularly powerful because there is no internal resistance to something not perceived as external control. Jung discovered that this hidden influence works through subtle shifts in perception and judgment rather than creating obvious compulsions. A woman doesn't suddenly feel an irresistible impulse she recognizes as foreign to her normal thinking. Instead, her preferences, attractions, and decision-making criteria shift in ways that feel entirely natural and authentic. She experiences these changes as personal growth or discovering what she truly wants, not as being controlled by biological programming. This mechanism operates through what Jung called emotional reframing. The same situations, behaviors, and people that existed before suddenly elicit different emotional responses. A stable relationship that once felt secure may now feel boring. A predictable routine that once provided comfort may now feel stifling. These are not conscious decisions to see things differently. They are automatic shifts in how her brain processes and reacts to familiar situations. What makes this particularly insidious is how it affects memory and the interpretation of past events. When this instinct becomes active, it doesn't just change how she perceives the present. It actually alters how she remembers the past. Conflicts in previous relationships become more significant in memory, while positive experiences fade. This selective amplification of memory makes her current situation seem worse than it actually was, while making new possibilities seem more promising than they are. The instinct also works by altering what captures her attention. Normally, people notice a wide range of information about potential partners: their kindness, reliability, shared interests, life goals. But when this biological programming activates, attention narrows to specific traits tied to genetic fitness. She may become intensely aware of physical presence, confidence, or dominance, barely noticing character traits that would normally matter to her. This selective attention creates a distorted picture of both her current situation and new possibilities. She may overlook obvious issues with a new person while becoming hypersensitive to minor issues with her current partner. The biological programming imposes filters on her perception, emphasizing information that supports its agenda while dismissing contrary evidence. Jung found that women in this state often report feeling more intuitive or in touch with their true desires. What they're actually experiencing is the influence of ancient biological software that feels authentic, because it comes from such a deep level of their psyche. The instinct doesn't feel like external manipulation. It feels like a final understanding of what they truly want after years of searching for themselves. The power of this hidden influence becomes even clearer when women try to resist attractions they know are problematic. They may intellectually recognize that someone is bad for them, bad for their future, or likely to cause trouble. But despite that intellectual understanding, they can't stop thinking about that person, making excuses for concerning behaviors, or creating opportunities to interact despite their better judgment. This creates an internal war between conscious knowledge and unconscious drive, which many women find deeply distressing. They know they should stay away from certain people or situations, but they feel drawn back repeatedly, despite repeated disappointments or obvious red flags. This isn't weakness or lack of self-control. It's the result of competing systems in the brain, where the biological programming often wins. The invisibility of this control also affects how women interpret their own behavior. When they make choices that surprise their friends and family, they create rational explanations that seem to make sense. They may say they've grown as a person or finally know what they want, not realizing these explanations mask decisions driven by unconscious biological urges. Perhaps most troubling is how this hidden programming can make women feel responsible for choices they didn't consciously make. When relationships go wrong or life changes lead to negative consequences, they blame themselves for making bad decisions. They don't realize they were acting under the influence of biological forces designed to bypass conscious choice, leading to feelings of guilt and self-criticism that compound the damage. The invisibility of the instinct also makes it nearly impossible to warn someone about its influence. Telling a woman she's being controlled by biological programming feels insulting or dismissive of her free will. Because she experiences this influence as her own authentic desires, suggestions that she's not in control of her choices feel like attacks on her intelligence or autonomy. Jung realized that recognizing this invisible influence requires a level of self-awareness that's difficult to achieve when experiencing it. It's like trying to examine your own eyes. The tool you need to see is the one you're trying to observe. This creates a paradox where the people who most need to understand this dynamic are the least likely to recognize it in themselves when it's happening. 5. When this instinct awakens in her. The awakening of this primal instinct doesn't happen randomly or consistently. Jung discovered that there are specific biological and psychological windows during which women become most vulnerable to its influence. Understanding these trigger periods explains why a person can be completely satisfied with their relationship for years, then suddenly become restless and drawn to entirely different types of people, seemingly overnight. The most predictable trigger occurs during certain phases of monthly biological cycles. Jung observed that women often report sudden shifts in what they find attractive during specific hormonal windows. A partner who seemed perfectly suitable days earlier can suddenly feel boring or inadequate. Men who would normally seem inappropriate or problematic can become intensely attractive during these periods. This isn't a conscious change in preferences. It's biology temporarily altering the criteria for attractiveness. Major life transitions also create windows of vulnerability. Career changes, moves to new places, milestone birthdays, or achieving major goals can trigger a period of biological reevaluation. During these times, the instinct becomes more active as the unconscious mind assesses whether current relationships and life choices still serve genetic and survival goals. Women going through these transitions often describe feeling like they're no longer the same person they were before. Stress and emotional upheaval create another avenue through which this instinct can emerge. When normal life routines are disrupted by illness, family issues, work pressures, or other major challenges, The biological programming may interpret this as a signal that current life strategies aren't working. This triggers a search for alternatives, often manifesting as sudden dissatisfaction with previously acceptable relationships and attraction to very different types of people. The instinct also awakens during periods of boredom or routine stagnation. When life becomes too predictable, the biological programming may misinterpret safety and stability as stagnation that could threaten long-term survival prospects. This creates an unconscious drive to seek stimulation and change, often through relationships with people who represent excitement and unpredictability. Jung noted that contact with certain types of men can also trigger this awakening, even in the absence of other factors. Men who display high confidence, physical presence, or a propensity for risk-taking can activate a biological response in women who were previously content. This isn't a conscious attraction. It's biological recognition systems responding to signals of genetic fitness. Social situations involving competition or comparison can also awaken this instinct. Weddings, social gatherings, or situations where women observe other couples can trigger unconscious evaluations of their own relationships. During these comparisons, the biological programming may decide that better options are available, leading to sudden dissatisfaction with previously satisfying partnerships. The awakening process often starts with subtle shifts in mood and perception before becoming more obvious. Women may notice they're daydreaming more, feeling restless, or becoming critical of things that didn't bother them before. They may find themselves paying more attention to other men or feeling less satisfied with physical intimacy in their current relationship. What makes this awakening particularly dangerous is that it often occurs during stable periods. Women who are happily married, successful in their careers, and content with their lives can suddenly start questioning everything. This timing gives the biological response more weight than it actually deserves, as if it's revealing hidden truths about their desires rather than being a temporary hormonal influence. The intensity of the awakening varies widely depending on the individual and the situation. Some women experience gradual shifts in attraction and interest over weeks or months. Others report dramatic overnight changes, waking up with completely different feelings about their relationships and life choices. The speed and intensity are often correlated with how strongly the triggers align with the biological programming. Environmental factors can also influence when this instinct awakens. Certain situations, social events, travel, new work environments create conditions that increase the likelihood of a biological response. These environments often involve meeting new people, experiencing different social dynamics, or breaking routine patterns that normally keep the instinct dormant. The awakening often comes with a sense of clarity and purpose that feels deeply compelling. Women describe feeling as if they're finally seeing their situation clearly after years of confusion or self-delusion. This sense of revelation makes the biological influence feel like a personal realization, rather than a temporary activation of programming. Jung found that understanding these trigger patterns can help women recognize when they might be more vulnerable to making dramatic life changes. However, merely knowing about the triggers doesn't make someone immune to their influence. The biological programming is designed to override conscious awareness, making it feel authentic and urgent, regardless of intellectual understanding. The duration of these awakening periods also varies widely. Some women experience short episodes that last days or weeks before returning to their previous mindset. Others find that, once awakened, the instinct remains active for months or even years, fundamentally altering their approach to relationships and life choices. 6. The men who activate this mechanism. Not all men trigger this powerful biological response. Jung discovered that certain characteristics and behaviors act as keys that unlock this ancient programming, often in ways that have nothing to do with being a good partner or even a decent person. Understanding these activation patterns explains why women sometimes choose men who seem blatantly unsuitable for them while ignoring those who would clearly treat them better. Physical presence plays a key role in triggering this instinct. Men who occupy space confidently, move with intention, and display physical capability activate biological recognition systems that operate below consciousness. This isn't about conventional attractiveness or muscle mass. It's about displaying the kind of physical confidence that would signal survival capability in ancestral environments. Emotional unavailability often serves as a powerful trigger, though not for the reasons most people assume. The biological programming interprets a man's indifference or emotional distance as a sign that he has many options and doesn't need to pursue a particular woman. This scarcity signals high genetic value to the unconscious mind, making him more desirable than men who show obvious interest and availability. Risk-taking activates this instinct because it demonstrates a willingness to face danger for potential rewards. Men who take calculated risks in business, sports, or other areas trigger biological responses tied to leadership and resource acquisition. However, the programming doesn't distinguish between intelligent risk and reckless behavior, which explains the attraction to men whose risk-taking is actually destructive. Social dominance serves as another key trigger. Individuals who naturally command attention in groups, make decisions easily, and influence others activate ancient recognition systems for leadership traits. This can manifest as attraction to men in positions of power, those who take charge in social situations, or even those who display dominance through less positive means, like aggression or control. Unpredictability creates biological interest because it prevents a woman from fully understanding or controlling a man's behavior. The instinct interprets this unpredictability as genetic complexity that could produce adaptable offspring. Men who are warm one moment and cold the next, who make surprising decisions, or who reveal new facets of themselves over time, maintain biological interest longer than those who are completely transparent. Competition powerfully triggers this mechanism. Men who are pursued by other women, who succeed in competitive environments, or who have options they're willing to act on, activate biological programming designed to recognize genetic quality through social proof. The unconscious mind interprets other women's interest as validation of that man's genetic value. Intelligence combined with a defiant attitude triggers this instinct in a way that intelligence alone cannot. Men who are brilliant but also willing to challenge social norms, break rules, or act outside conventional boundaries activate programming that recognizes both genetic quality and survival capability. This explains the attraction to brilliant men who are also rebellious or unconventional. Financial resources alone don't typically trigger this biological response unless paired with other factors. However, individuals who acquire resources through risk-taking, competition, or dominance activate the instinct. It's not the wealth itself, but the behaviors that generated it that trigger the biological recognition systems. Mysterious or reserved behavior activates this programming because it suggests hidden depth and complexity. Men who don't reveal everything about themselves, who have private interests or activities, or who maintain independence despite a relationship trigger a biological curiosity aimed at exploring potential genetic complexity. The timing of when men display these traits also matters. Behaviors that might normally seem negative can become intensely attractive when displayed at the right moment. A man showing protective aggression when she feels threatened can trigger intense biological attraction, whereas the same aggression displayed inappropriately would be repulsive. It's particularly important to understand that these triggers operate independently of whether a man would be a good partner. The biological programming evolved in environments vastly different from modern society and responds to traits that were useful for survival and reproduction in ancestral conditions, but may be problematic in modern relationships. Men who activate this mechanism often do so without conscious intent or knowledge. They may simply be expressing natural aspects of their personality that happen to align with these ancient triggers. This unconscious activation can create intense attraction that neither party fully understands or controls. The intensity of the biological response also depends on how many of these triggers a man exhibits simultaneously. Someone who displays multiple traits, physical confidence, emotional unavailability, risk-taking, and social dominance, creates a far stronger activation than someone who shows only one or two. Jung observed that men who successfully trigger this instinct often have complex personalities that combine attractive and problematic traits. They may be confident but also arrogant, successful but unreliable, exciting but also dangerous. This combination creates a kind of genetic complexity that the biological programming is designed to identify and pursue, regardless of the practical consequences for modern relationships. 7. Why doesn't logic work? Here, the most frustrating aspect of this biological instinct is how it completely bypasses rational thought processes. Well-meaning friends and family often try to help women in these situations by presenting logical arguments, making pros and cons lists, or pointing out obvious issues with their choices. They don't understand that logic operates in an entirely different part of the brain than this ancient programming. And when these two systems are in conflict, biology usually wins. The biological instinct processes information through circuits that developed millions of years before humans acquired language or complex reasoning abilities. These ancient circuits are designed to make rapid decisions in life or death situations, where taking time to think could mean missing a critical opportunity or failing to survive immediate threats. When this system activates, it treats relationship decisions with the same urgency and importance as fleeing a predator or securing food during a famine. Logical reasoning requires the prefrontal cortex, the most recent part of the human brain in evolutionary terms. This is where we weigh options, consider consequences, and make plans for the future. But when powerful biological drives activate, they flood the brain with chemicals that actually inhibit prefrontal cortex activity. This isn't a design flaw. It's an evolutionary feature that prevents overthinking in situations where rapid action was historically necessary for survival. The chemical cocktail released during biological attraction includes substances that create tunnel vision and reduce the ability to process information contrary to the biological choice. Dopamine causes intense focus on the target, while norepinephrine amplifies emotional responses and reduces the capacity for complex reasoning. These chemicals literally alter how the brain processes information, making logical arguments feel irrelevant or even annoying. Women experiencing this biological override often report that logical concerns about their choices feel abstract and unimportant compared to the intense emotions they're feeling. They may intellectually admit that someone is bad for them, but feel unable to emotionally disengage. This creates an internal conflict between what they know and what they feel, and the feelings usually prove stronger than the knowledge. The timing of when logic is attempted also affects its effectiveness. During periods of intense biological attraction, the brain is essentially wired to ignore information that might interfere with pursuing a genetic opportunity. Arguments about practical concerns, future consequences, or relationship issues get filtered out as irrelevant noise that distracts from the essential biological mission. Logical arguments can even backfire during these periods because they're interpreted as interference with authentic desires. When rational reasons are presented for why a choice is problematic, the biological programming may reframe them as others trying to control her decisions or hold her back from her true self. This creates resistance to logic and makes the biological choice feel even more authentic and important. The social pressure that often accompanies logical arguments makes them even less effective. When family and friends unite to present rational objections to someone's romantic choices, it can trigger defensive reactions that reinforce commitment to the biologically driven decision. Feeling like everyone is against her choice makes it feel more significant and worth defending rather than reconsidering. Jung discovered that the biological instinct has its own form of logic, which operates by different rules than conscious reasoning. This biological logic prioritizes genetic fitness, survival advantage, and reproductive success over modern concerns like compatibility, shared values, or emotional stability. From this biological perspective, choosing a genetically superior option makes sense, even if it seems irrational by modern standards. Evidence presented through logical reasoning is often reinterpreted through the filter of biological attractiveness. Red flags about someone's character get minimized as insignificant details or signs that they're exciting and unconventional. Financial instability gets reframed as proof of their willingness to take risks for bigger gains. Emotional unavailability becomes evidence that they're selective and therefore more valuable. During these periods, memory also becomes selective, making logical arguments less effective. Positive interactions with a biologically attractive person are remembered more vividly, while negative experiences fade or are reinterpreted as misunderstandings. This selective memory makes the biological choice seem more reasonable than it actually is based on objective evidence. The intensity of the biological response creates a conviction that feels stronger than logical analysis. When someone feels powerful attraction combined with the chemical rush of new possibilities, logical concerns feel weak and uncertain by comparison. The biological response provides emotional certainty that logical analysis cannot match, making rational arguments feel vague or overthought. Women going through this often describe a sense that others don't understand what they're experiencing or are missing something others can't see. This isn't delusion. It's the result of biological programming that creates different priorities and different ways of processing relationship information. What seems obvious to logical analysis may actually feel less important than the biological cues they're responding to. Perhaps most importantly, Jung realized that fighting biological drives with logic alone rarely succeeds because it's trying to override millions of years of evolutionary programming with the latest advancements in human reasoning abilities. The biological systems are older, more powerful, and specifically designed to bypass conscious thought when genetic opportunities arise. This doesn't mean women are incapable of rational choices or that biology determines everything. It does mean, however, that understanding these forces requires recognizing that humans operate through multiple decision-making systems that don't always agree. The most effective approaches acknowledge the power of biological drives while working with them, rather than simply trying to overpower them with rational arguments. The frustration felt by friends and family when their logical arguments don't work is understandable but misplaced. They're fundamentally trying to convince someone to ignore powerful biological signals with tools that operate in an entirely different part of the brain. Understanding why logic doesn't work in these situations is the first step to finding more effective ways to help people navigate the conflict between biological drives and conscious choice.